to have some fun in this after chat. You said you had a fun story.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is a fun story. A teenager was brought to me at one time, who was under the delusion that he was a robot,
Oh,
and this was causing quite a problem. He was impossible to teach. He was acting robotically. He was just failing school. His family was at a loss. He had defeated a number of therapists.
defeated. I like that word.
Defeated. I'm a robot. I said, what does that mean? I'm just a mechanical object. I'm a robot. So what I did, I said, well, it's not a problem for me. I've treated robots before, so this is fine. I'm not going to argue with you about this.
Hi, I'm Liz Larson.
And I'm Bill McKenna.
And together, we created the Cognomovement system. And we'd like to welcome you to the New Life Perspectives radio show,
where we're going to be sharing with you tools, tips, and ideas that are going to change your life.
Hello, hello in UK Health Radio Land. I'm Liz Larson, and normally I'm here with my friend Bill McKenna, but he is off in La La Land, or LA as we like to say, working with one of our clients today. He'll be back with us next week. Bill and I are the hosts of the New Life Perspectives radio show here on the UK Health Radio Network, and we are also the team that created the Cognomovement system. And I have a guest today that I have been, just so excited about talking to, really taking all of my notes and writing it down. And it's Jerry Kantor, and he's going to talk to us today about homeopathy. Now, I grew up with homeopathy in my household, and, I have a very cursory knowledge of it, but it saved lives. There's no joke that in my family's history, my mom saved lives with homeopathy again and again and again. And she didn't work as a healer. She was just a mom. So I'm really passionate about this. And I want to welcome Jerry Kantor to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Jerry Kantor has done something incredible. And he's written a book called Sane Asylums. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it here. Mine is all marked up. And it is a history of homeopathy being used in psychiatry in the early days of the U.S. history, used for psychiatry in what were eventually called asylums, which I love that in your book, why it's called an asylum. Now we think it's something terrible, but originally it was literally like a peaceful home and asylum. And off camera, we were talking about really the injustice that's been done to this particular healing modality and how it's been erased from our actual history. So would you share with everybody what happened there? How did this happen?
How did this happen? Well, the power of the pharmaceutical industry is absolutely at play here. Basically, in 1910, the Flexner Report came out, which was sponsored by Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. And it was done to really tear down the reputations of all kinds of alternative, they were not alternative at that time, naturopathic schools of medicine, herbal schools of medicine, homeopathy, to clear the land for these patentable pharmaceuticals that were the byproducts of oil production. Wow, was that ever successful? And the hypocrisy of that was monumental, because John D. Rockefeller was actually used homeopathy extensively. So I simply cannot understand that. So there's been a tremendous campaign against homeopathy. I mean, the remedies are not patented. No one owns them, so there's no profit motive involved in manufacturing them. And this has been from 150 years now, the bugaboo of the pharmaceutically sponsored medicine. Back in the days, the time I wrote about for this book was around 1875 to 1930, let's say. In the 1870s, homeopaths were not only successful and popular, they were wealthy. They were all through Abraham Lincoln's cabinet. In those days, just before the patentable medicines took sway, well, that was 1910. Everybody, physicians wanted control over what they prescribed, and homeopaths and allopathic physicians used the same medicines. Except it was a question of what the dilution of that medicine was, and nobody claimed that homeopathy was ineffective. Not at all. They knew it, and they tried to poach its remedies all the time. And when allopaths discovered that a certain medicine worked better when they used less of it, they heralded that as their own personal discovery, as if Hahnemann never existed. So this has gone back a long, long time. But the campaign has gotten more and more vicious, more and more effective in the last 30 years. Even now in England, I mean, places where it's been completely entrenched, they're attacking it because it's such a threat to pharmaceutical usage. And it's particularly terrible in the area of mental health. Really bad when people feel that they have no alternative but to use these awful psychiatric drugs that cause things like tardive dyskinesia, which never existed before. It's really a disaster. So that's the drum that I've been beating for a while. The homeopathic asylums, they're called, mental hospitals for the insane. That was the word that was used back in those days. Were very good models. They were actually utopian. They were self-sufficient at farms. They had all kinds of cultural activities. People could stay there until as long as they needed. They weren't drugged up and then sent back to their dysfunctional situations. They were just wonderful in so many ways. And it just astounds me, having gone down this rabbit hole, that history has simply been made to disappear at every academic level. When I undertook this, I would look at the conventional textbooks on mental hospitals in this country and psychiatric care. Wow, hospitals with 59 buildings, 2,000 beds, which were 20, and which were maybe several of them with 25% of the entire population of mental hospitals, not reported on? How's that possible? Apparently it is, because the truth is inconvenient. And other things besides homeopathy were offered there, but it was a really very good model. And the nurses were fantastic. I wrote about a nurse called Clara Barris, who was an absolute homeopathic genius. She wrote a book called Nursing the Insane, which is a fantastic book. Just a very good model. And the reason it all fell apart over years, I mean, I document that in my book in a chapter on concessions to the spirit of the times. There are many reasons for that, mostly having to do with the success of those asylums, whereby the state would cram far too many clients in there. They couldn't treat them properly. They became underfunded. Many things happened. And of course, the advent of the pharmaceuticals would put tremendous pressure on homeopaths to alter their schools and let the fox into the hen house, so to speak. It's a long story, but I think I told it fairly well in the book, and it's hard to summarize right now.
Yeah, it is hard to summarize because, there's a long, long history of homeopathy and it being used very successfully for psychiatric illnesses. And psychiatric illnesses, whether anybody likes it or not, is on the rise. We've got children with autism. I think the latest is 1 in 48 has autism. And I heard a statistic recently, and I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but 1 in 4 have some kind of neurological disorder. We heard about a child recently, 10 years old, who developed tics and sputters and snorts and stutters, kind of this weird physical and mental issue. He was prescribed with an antipsychotic drug to treat that. So it's really one of those things that as a population, we have got to be able to have a better solution. So many of the psychiatric drugs people are put on and they never get off. There's really never an idea that you might get really better. The idea is in allopathic psychiatry that you will be on that medication for the rest of your life. And some of them have terrible side effects when you go off of them. So the idea that at one point in history, we had a flourishing way to treat psychiatric illness, and it's been hidden from us, that's a crime. We need to all know about this. So let's start with, just for anybody who doesn't know, what is homeopathy? What does the word mean?
Well, homeo means same as, apathy means sickness, same to treat sickness. It's the law of similars. And that has been, that's something, that's a basic truth that's also been hidden and mischaracterized. I can't tell you how many people think homeopathy is synonymous with anything gentle. Not true.
Yeah.
Or two other words that start with H. It's holistic. Well, yes, it is holistic, but lots of things are holistic that are not homeopathic. Then there's herbs. People come and say, yeah, they have homeopathy, and it turns out that they've been taking some kind of herb.
Yeah.
The remedies are very, very, very dilute, which puts them in a tremendous, totally different category from anything else. In a gross amount, a particular substance, which could be a plant, a chemical compound, a gas, a venom from a snake or an ant, would produce in a bunch of healthy individuals under our research protocols, produce a complete profile of a symptom, will produce symptoms, mental and emotional symptoms that are very specific. And then we then catalog into our materia medica. And so during our intakes and our investigation into the client, we find out, oh, it's as if so-and-so was poisoned by such a substance. She has these exact same symptoms. She has this mindset, these behaviors, these variables. That's a match with this substance. So then you can count on a paradoxical effect. You give a dilute amount of that substance, and the person starts to process the remedy. I have some metaphors that I use to explain this. It's like a permission slip to the subconscious to overcome something that it originally thought was way too big to deal with. So the body then produces polarities. It tricks the vital force, which is our code word for the subconscious, but imbued with physical characteristics. It tricks the vital force into converting a chronic problem into something like an acute problem. We're all terrified of acute illnesses these days, but actually acute illnesses are what keeps us healthy. They allow us to identify a pathogen, to mobilize against it, and then fight it off. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. A chronic illness is like the Cold War, constant tension. You've got good days and bad days. It's always there. The thing is, the chronic model of illness is we have normalized it because it's so economically successful, and we're all terrified of acute illness. You're asking me about how homeopathy works. So yeah, it's kind of this permission slip. It tricks the vital force into converting a chronic problem into something acute. I also liken it to a very common idea, getting back on the horse that threw you. I mean, this is just advanced placement common sense. If a horse throws you and you never get back on it, you may have a fear of riding a horse for the rest of your life, especially if you grew up in the Wild West. That was not just a casual thing. It might have impaired your entire livelihood. To get you back on a horse, maybe not the same crazy horse that threw you, but how about a pony or a gentle horse? Even so, once you're on that horse or pony, you say, oh my God, I'm on a horse again. This is terrible. I'm going to be thrown. Then you get led around the corral and nothing happens. And you get off the horse. You say, maybe it wasn't all horses. Maybe it was just that one horse. I'm back to baseline. So this many things in ordinary understanding parallel this. Facing your demons is better than never facing it. So the pony is actually the equivalent of the pony in homeopathy is the medicine that in a gross amount would produce something very much like what you have. It's just advanced placement common sense. And this is why the FDA has branded homeopathics drugs. They have more official standing, another extraordinary thing, than herbs, vitamins, nutritional supplements. They have this official standing that the FDA itself gave that they're drugs, because the substances have been demonstrated to do what they do, and according to the law of similars. If it produces that effect, you don't need to create a randomized, controlled, double-blind study to say it will do such and such. The fact that it produces those effects, very clearly guarantees that it will have the beneficial effect in a dilute amount.
Yeah, this is such a fascinating conversation. I'm so excited to hear what you have to say next. We need to hear from the good folks at the UK Health Radio Network. So we will be right back with Jerry Kantor and homeopathy. UK Health Radio, take it away. And we're back with Jerry M. Kantor and the book Sane Asylums. And we're talking about homeopathy and the idea that, in my own vernacular, what my mom used to always say is like cures like. Another way of saying this is that the problem and the solution can be in the same place. This is one of the ideas, the premises that we also using in Cognomovement. One of the others is that the body has the ability to autocorrect. Would you say that that's what homeopathy does, is assist the body in autocorrecting? In that, realistically, when analyzed in homeopathic remedies, there's really nothing there, right? They say there's really nothing there. There's an energy signature. And then it allows the body to make its own correction, or is that way off in left field?
No, that's exactly right. That's how we are built. When we become well through acute illness, there's nothing there that prompted that other than the impetus of the vital force. We are designed to get well, and that's how we got well through eons, and how animals keep themselves well. But it does happen that, you know, a trauma or a plague going through the society will produce such an imprint on people that they cannot overcome it. And so the gentle version of that, of the villain in the piece, which could be a pathogen or could be a psychological influence, is just enough to prod the vital force into revisiting the scene of the crime under more favorable circumstances. This is how I see it. So homeopathy at the philosophical level is a very humble idea. We just give the remedy and the body takes over. We get out of the way. But that's a very big deal about what happens. And selecting the right remedy can be really exciting and a challenge, and extremely illuminating. Sometimes when I explain a remedy to people sufficiently, there's even less than the remedy there, because the explanation is absorbed and the remedy starts to work before it's even been taken. This has happened, and homeopaths have lots of stories like that. Very, very psychological medicine.
It's really true. With allopathic medicine, it's often you look at one symptom. Whatever the body is demonstrating in this moment, that's the symptom they look at. So with things like psychiatry, if you're depressed, they're okay, so you feel depressed. And they don't really look at everything else that's going on in the body. In Cognomovement and neuro-linguistic programming, we call it a submodality. So maybe you're depressed. Maybe you also have a dropped foot. Maybe you're depressed, but you're also a person who burps a lot. Maybe you're depressed, but you got an itch inside your ear. Or maybe, this one's so interesting to me, a very specific chronic thought. You have a fear of somebody under your bed. Weird, but it may be the indicator of the remedy that a person needs. So in that way, homeopathy is incredibly holistic, because it really does look at everything that the body is and does, even the body shape, even the face shape, yes. Correct?
Yes. Not very politically correct, but everything counts. I want to also expand on your point, getting a little philosophical. The conventional medicine is based on the idea that our commonalities matter more than anything else, that we're all basically the same, and that deviations from the so-called norm are sickness. Homeopathy, once again, is on the other side of the fence. You and I have the same number of bones, same organs. From the standpoint of prescribing, the differences matter much, much more than the similarities. When people come and say, "Oh, Jerry, I fall between all the cracks. What are you going to do? They don't know what to make of me." I say, "That's terrific. Everyone's a crack to me. Let me have a crack at this." Yeah, so it's not just this conglomeration of weird little symptoms that we find interesting. When you actually figure it out after the fact, it's so obvious. Oh my God, you're arsenicum, you're cocculus, you're staphysagrine. Oh boy, how okay. Now I know it all hangs together. It's kind of obvious after the fact. There is some reason the body is talking, and all the symptoms they're not random. They're actually expressing something, which is why I wrote my first book, which is called Interpreting Chronic Illness, which is a synthesis of homeopathy and traditional Chinese medicine and biomedicine, on the basis of being able to interpret the symptoms of the body and what they're actually trying to say. So I have another adage, which is that acute illness detoxifies, but chronic illness informs, provided that you can interpret the symptoms. And that is so liberating to people when I can explain what their chronic illness is and what the remedy is going to initiate a reversal of. Very, very liberating, as opposed to the model of, well, we're going to take these tests, we got to wait 2 or 3 months. The tests are inconclusive, let's do some more. But worry, you've got a lot to worry about here, because we don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, I love that. I heard you say that acute illness, like when you've got the flu, really what's happening is your body is detoxifying from whatever the substance is that's creating the illness. That's why you feel so ill, is the body's detoxifying. But that's different than chronic illness. It is different information.
Let me give you an example, since you brought up like the flu. A very common remedy for the flu is gelsemium. Okay, people can go there, think, oh, this will get rid of my flu. But there's a secret inside that remedy, which is its psychological component. Gelsemium at the constitutional level is about being fearful, being a chicken, having experienced a setback of some sort. And if you have had a setback, this is, again, advanced placement common sense. When we're afraid, we tend to shiver. So the gelsemium picture includes, fevers and chills and shivering. After 9/11, I found that suddenly I'm treating the flu left and right. It's because people were frightened.
Yeah.
So it's not just, we're not just a machine with symptoms attached to us at a very deep level. The consciousness drives the bus, is driving everything. And
Yeah.
This is the important thing. I would be shocked if I gave gelsemium and it just took care of your flu if it did not also address your fear.
Yeah.
People, and the other aspects of that remedy state, want to go into the room and curl up into a ball and not see anybody. This is fearful. This is not just the flu. This is something that you can actually, interpret.
Yeah, there's more information there than you even anticipate. It just made me think, just in usefulness, during the recent plague, we use a lot of natural medicine and homeopathy and all that, and we just did not think we would end up with it. However, we went through a really big trauma, a death, a wedding, a bomb cyclone. No kidding. And we all ended up sick. And everybody had different symptoms. Nobody had the same symptoms of this thing. We had these really electrical kind of symptoms. It felt like we were electrocuted all the time, pain in the neck. But at the very beginning, I got croup, that kind of, my throat swelled, that barking cough. Well, I knew exactly what to do about it for me. I used Spongiatosta, and it was less than 20 minutes, might have been 10 minutes. That symptom was absolutely gone. So I didn't have to get outside help. I didn't have to go to the hospital. Had that continued, because it was pretty acute in the moment, I might have ended up there. And a lot of us know what happened to people who ended up there. So because I became aware that some of us in our family were experiencing that, we knew ahead of time. We had it on hand. We told people what to do, and they avoided it as well. Another fun story, it's not really fun, but a long time ago, my daughter had a cat. And I think someone had put out decon for rats, and the cat must have eaten a mouse or something. But all of a sudden, her tongue was hanging out of her mouth and it was dry. And I thought, oh my gosh, she has been dosed with arsenic, which is what it's in the rat killing stuff. So I gave her arsenicum in her mouth and in her bowl, and it saved her life. Within, about 15 minutes, she was right as rain again. So those are some of the ways that we used homeopathy, kind of in the way that allopathic medicine does. We saw a symptom and we knew what matched that, and we're able to use the homeopathy. But what I love so much is that the deeper use of this modality by professionals like you literally are a form of a detective. In Cognomovement, we use the term neurological detective because we're looking for the most micro movement of the body. But in homeopathy, it's everything. It's how you think. It's who you are. It's what you look like. It's everything. And so to me, that is just ultimately fascinating. Do you consider yourself a detective?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that. The term I use is actually spiritual forensics.
Ah, I love
And
that.
if when in October, my next book is coming out, which is called The Emotional Roots of Chronic Illness, Homeopathy for Existential Stress. And what I've done there, really gone quite into depth about what you're talking about. It's actually a sequel to my first book on interpreting chronic illness. What I've done there is I've cataloged the remedies as subcategories of 5 key existential questions. So I have these 5 existential questions which correlate with the 5 elements in Chinese medicine and also the 5 classical miasms in homeopathy. And then pretty much every remedy I could, well, many remedies I could think of where the theme is very, very specific. You know, I've divulged the existential issue there. Now, existentialism does not just mean, oh, damn, we're all going to die. It's the search for meaning. It's wanting to know something or resolve a particular question. And existential questions do not have logical answers, but they have a very, very powerful charge. There's many of them, and I've subdivided them according to that. And so that's that deep kind of dive that you're talking about. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that book coming out and discussing that further.
So are you saying that homeopathy can help raise our consciousness?
It has no choice. That's what happens. If you process a remedy, yeah, you feel better, but that's not the bottom line. You get better because your perspective has enlarged, because you've taken the charge out of an existential question. You are more free, you have more awareness, and your consciousness is absolutely raised. And that issue, once that issue has been, the hash of that has been settled, you're not going to encounter it again. Something else will come up because the psyche is very interesting. It will bring things forward. Is not content to let you be sipping pina coladas on the beach the rest of your life. It will bring up issues from well before then that were submerged, where you were insulated from, in the service of your spiritual growth. So you just progress.
Yeah, it's amazing. We know that in our work, when we find the root of someone's trauma and we do it through the physical body, the neurology will show it if you know how to look. Oftentimes it's not at all what they thought it was. I tell a story about a person whose life was run over a popsicle, and the body will start a neurological protective pattern around what it perceives as an injury. What we've also seen is some of those come from our heritage. You know, we're born with our DNA running a pattern that it's not necessarily even ours. It's something that was passed down for many millennia in some cases. So when a person can, first of all, see it, it's like a flash, they see it, and then they understand, oh my gosh, that wasn't even a thing. Everything else connected to it collapses in our experience, and the energy returns to the body. The body literally isn't in flight or flight around that issue. And it sends that energy back to healing and thinking and loving and having brand new perspectives and consciousness. So it makes perfect sense to me that homeopathy can do that. Would you say it's at a cellular level? Is it at a DNA level? What do you think?
Well, energy, that's a major question. That's the kind of question that reductionists always ask. Energy is not really reducible. I think about quantum physics or the energy fields. It's just the wrong path of investigation to go down. You have to understand energy fields. I mean, is there a science of the soul? I mean, I believe that there is an animating spirit, and what you said before, that we come into this life not a blank slate. We have our own lingo to discuss that, but if you really insist on finding something specifically cellular, like the idea that you can manipulate the cells, you're not going to get the effects that you'd like with homeopathy. We have the lingo we use is miasm, the idea of miasms. So the 5 classical miasms are tuberculosis, gonorrhea, syphilis, cancer, and something called sora. I have broken those down into existential questions, and which, when they're not resolved, if you come into this life with that question, kind of one version of that question burning in you, that will make you susceptible to those particular illnesses or variants of them. But and you can certainly can talk about those diseases in terms of what they, how they specifically manifest in the body. There's no question about that. But if you're going to get rid of them, you do better if you attack the spiritual issue that's there, as opposed to attacking every cancer cell
right.
or or the organs that get afflicted. It's just not right. If you do biology and you look at a little cell under a microscope with a hugely powerful microscope, you'll see every little organelle in there and so forth. But you wouldn't know the big picture, whether it came from a frog or a human being or a horse. That counts. That's important. And what makes that important is how that cell actually functions in a living thing. It's why it's so difficult to implant, pig cells into human beings. There's something going on there that is not appropriate to monkey with.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. When we try to break it down too far, then we stop looking at the whole picture. So this conversation is so fascinating to me. But we've got to take a quick break and hear from the good folks at the UK Health Radio Network. UK Health, take it away. And we're back with Jerry Kantor and the book Sane Asylums. And we're talking about homeopathy in general, but more specifically, how homeopathy can be used for psychiatric illness. So, we were talking about that homeopathy treats the entire being, and that it shifts things even at the existential level, even at the etheric level, even at the soul level. But when it's your family member who is starting to have what looks like a mental illness, or let's break it down even farther, what looks like an illness of the brain, and your only option is drugs that have such horrific side effects, including things like, suicide. How can homeopathy help with that? What kind of salve can you offer people who are considering helping someone in that situation with homeopathy?
Well, I found that in the main, people who have conditions which are considered so radical, it's mainly been exacerbated by the existing pharmaceuticals. And one reason I can say that, I just know it from personal practice, but the other is from having written this book and looked at what madness looked like, 150 years ago. It was very, very different. Very, very different. It's not, first of all, there's no evidence that it's exclusively a brain problem, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I'll say something else. I mean, people hearing voices. I've got a client now who hears voices. Well, that's considered like a big break with reality, right? But if you think about it, we all hear voices. It's called self-consciousness. So a voice told me this morning I should brush my teeth, put my clothes on. It's a question of if you become so frightened. Actually, I have a definition. I created a new definition of mental illness at the end of the book, which is a kind of combination of being frightened, of having your perspective narrowed, and exhaustion. Extreme common sense. Those a perfect storm of convergence of those three factors will produce what we call a mental illness. But if you deal with each of those, together, well, if you deal with them together or individually, as I was able to do in these asylums, lo and behold, this sort of thing goes away. Because again, there's not an absolute distinction between somebody hearing voices and being depersonalized. The voices will be about, if you take the time to listen to the person, will be about something that has occurred early in their history. Something has something to do with how they're put together, what proclivity they have for being guilt-ridden, for example, or something that's carried over from the legacy. It can be addressed not any differently from anything else we do with homeopathy. When the first Western psychiatrists went to China and tried to convince the physicians there that that psychiatry was a separate discipline, they got laughed at in their face. They said, "What are you talking about? We treat that exactly the same way as we do anything else with our pulse diagnosis, our tongue diagnosis, and meridian analysis and treatment. It is not a separate category." I think again, over time, the wealth of the pharmaceutical industry overpowered even that. you do have traditional medicine still operating in China, but this idea that when you break something down into its parts and then you create reductionist types of interventions, it's so economically successful, it destroys common sense in people. It absolutely does. And I like to break homeopathy down to its lowest common denominator, although it's not a trivial thing to talk about the soul or the spirit, but still, I mean, how complicated is getting back on the horse that threw you? How complicated is that? In any case, to your question, if I can get somebody free, if someone comes to me not on psychiatric medications, they're 100 times easier to treat than when they are on all kinds of drugs.
Yeah.
And my patients are coming in sicker and sicker because of the predominance of these drugs. It's unbelievable. And I've got to detoxify them first before I can get really a good effect. Whereas in the past, we could say, yes, I think I can cure you in five visits. Now I say something different. I say, well, I've got to get traction with you. I've got to get in some sense that get to some place where you're sufficiently reactive to what I'm doing that you are then encouraged to begin a slow weaning process from your medications. And this is what we have to do when we're treating autism, when we're treating, these terrible psychiatric conditions, and also just the enormous amount of anxiety that we see in the population, anxiety and fear, and depression. On their own, they're not any harder to treat than they were 150 years ago. But the medication history complicates things very, very much.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you said that. It really is true. It's not just one thing. If you're looking at in the insane asylums of the past, they were helping people relax. There's a story about people learning to watch and play baseball that was very therapeutic for them, just to sit and enjoy, watching or playing, having some joy in their life, getting out of the pressures of the daily grind, really. So there was helping them calm. There's the nutrition as well, that can play a part. What's happening in the home life, what the family history is. Finances can play a part. Stress, really all of those are stressors, create a big situation. So what you're saying is true, because in allopathic medicine, it's a pill. We are so accustomed to, here's a pill. Here's a pill for your child's ADHD. Here's a pill for autism. Here's a pill for schizophrenia. Here's a pill for bipolar. Here's a bill for bill for depression. And then we want to go home and be all better. But with natural medicine in general, or just holistic approach, you really have to look at all of the things combined that are creating the human that you see in front of you. Is that correct?
Yeah. By the way, when people arrived at the asylums in those days, right away they were put in bed. They were put because the exhaustion was a big piece of it. They got really good nutrition. In those days, the milk was really very, very wholesome. They were given milk. They were given just rest. And the nurses, as I say, trained by Clara Barris, were trained to actually engage with your delusions. They didn't say, "Oh, you've got this, now take a pill." They would argue, well, listen to you gently, give you an opportunity to process different ideas. They actually engaged, like every one of them was a therapist, was a mental health therapist, and no one was looked at as there were people who were very, very far gone from alcoholism, from what they call dementia praecox in those days, all kinds of paralytic conditions. People were quite sick, but not quite the way they are now. But they were engaged with, and there was never a belief that you're just going to warehouse them and drug them up. The nurses were absolutely unbelievable, and this homeopath circulated around the hospital, and people bit by bit were given responsibilities, were given things to do that they liked. They could do carpentry, they could garden, they could write. They were treated with tremendous respect, and this was also, to be fair, part of the moral care movement. So that there was very good care in the early days, especially when the asylums did not have to hold that many people. Much more respect for folks, I think, at that time.
Yeah, I agree with you. Much more respect, it seems like. So what does it look like when a person comes in to see you? What happens first? Is it a long session where you're taking in their history, talking to them, looking at them? hearing the way they talk? What does it look like?
Yeah, all those things. Yeah, in my office, so the initial consult is an hour and a half long. Everything counts, their demeanor, their clothes, their gestures, my feelings about them. If I have to objectify my own feelings, they count. They can make a tremendous difference. And yeah, I like to hear a life story. I'm very free form. Sometimes I'll ask them to write me a mini autobiography ahead of time, telling me the lowlights of their life, traumas, losses, upheavals. I'll go into their parents' life, the circumstances around their birth, all that stuff, and I just listen. I ask questions. At some point during the interview, I mean, my inner algorithm is constantly working, and I'm breaking it down. And when I start asking very bizarre questions, that means I'm differentiating between a small number of remedies. And then something magical usually happens at the hour and 20-minute mark, and I say, oh, okay. What do you think about this? And the person, if I'm right, say, oh my God, how'd you? Or I'll ask something, and they say, I was about to tell you about that, or how'd you know that?
Yeah, it feels like you're a mind reader.
Yeah. It's a certain kind of ability to pay attention and being aware of one's own biases so that you can put them to the side. I mean, it might be that someone comes in here and say, I don't like this person. I really don't get a good feeling. Let me examine that, what the remedies are that produce that. And then, you always get to a non-judgmental, compassionate place, but you can't really not acknowledge those feelings. They're useful.
Yeah, it's
So,
true, isn't it?
yeah.
Most people don't ever think about that. We use it in our work as well. Your initial reaction to them as a practitioner
Oh, yeah.
counts.
Yeah.
It matters, and there's ways you keep yourself in check, but there is something there about their field and that kind of a thing. So I know that homeopathy can be delivered in a number of different ways. We talked about off camera whether or not Bach flowers, flower essences were a part of that. So there is traditional homeopathy, and then there's some subsets. And you told me that Bach flowers are a subset, but also considered homeopathy. So do you subscribe to giving a person a constitutional, meaning they take the same homeopathic every day for a period of time or a number of times, or do you subscribe to the one dose theory?
Oh, yeah. I'm a one dose practitioner. If I have to detoxify somebody, that's a different matter. I don't have any problem with lower potency remedies that have to be repeated. They just don't work at quite as high a level. There was a practitioner by the name of Frederick Humphreys in the also around the 1880s who produced a manual of self-care using low potency combination remedies, which were tremendously effective. And the little manual that people had millions were bought. He was hugely successful. And the academic homeopaths thought he was going to be a problem for people, for the constitutional prescribers. And he said, no, well, this will popularize homeopathy. And at that time, it was true. But over time, it's turned out that, the academics were correct, because nowadays people think they can just take some little pill for a condition and be okay. And very few people have an awareness of the constitutional way of working.
Yeah, so you do the one dose. And then often with homeopathy, there is a follow-up. So one homeopathic remedy to start, and then something that follows that as well. So a person you'll leave with maybe one remedy. Is this correct? Or do you give them that dose in the session?
I usually give it in the session. And yeah, it's a very high stakes bet because the remedy is such a high potency. It's like I'm saying, this is it. You need this. Now, also, if I'm right, I'll have a sense of the time frame. I'll say, when you come back in 5 weeks, this layer will have been peeled away. This red layer is insulating you from a certain kind of pain underneath that. I've got an idea what that's going to be. I give them as clear an idea about what they're going to go through as possible. And so when they come back, or if they're far away, I'm doing a lot of work by Zoom. If I mail the remedy, I'll also sometimes mail the remedy I suspect will be coming up in 5 weeks, just to save time. I will sometimes do that. But yeah, if they're not on any other kinds of medications, my single way of prescribing this high stakes bet works for me. And then my only challenge is managing folks through their aggravations explaining things to them, because they're not side effects. Side effects of a drug are the body saying, I can't accommodate this, I can't assimilate this, I don't like this. And the doctor, who's got to pay a lot of malpractice for the privilege, says, oh, the good outweighs the bad. Take it again, take it again, take it again. But a remedy will produce familiar effects. There'll be either an exaggeration of existing symptoms or return of old symptoms. And I will make that clear to the person and manage them through it. And usually by the time they come back, I say, darn, you're right. I was going to curse you every way for 3 weeks. Now I showed up here and I feel really good. Well, that's the timing I chose.
Yeah, you know, that's a hard thing when you know that's going to happen, that they're going to go through. It happens in our work as well. We know sometimes they're instantly better, and other times, you know, it's 3 or 4 days or longer where their body has to autocorrect. It takes time to work itself out. It's kind of like a ball of yarn, and then the body is slowly sorting it. Now, the thing I think that it would be interesting to everyone is that, let's say you get the dose wrong. In that case, homeopathy just does nothing, right? It can't hurt you.
All right. If I'm wrong, there's a couple of things that can happen. So I mean, I'm not infallible either, but if I'm wrong, usually the wrong remedy will push out something more clear, or else, or I could say, well, that was a very thin layer of such and such. But a completely wrong remedy, if you give somebody even a low dose of something that really has nothing to do with them, could produce improving. That's possible. But even those effects are temporary. I've seldom seen a remedy do absolutely nothing.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like to be accurate. I've developed some skills in doing this, and if I'm wrong, I'm not usually far off. It can happen, but not usually.
But that's interesting. So maybe that the homeopathic remedy that you do find is close enough that it does create a response.
You know, if a medicine is to be powerful, it has to be a little bit forgiving. We have a high standard of accuracy, but take, for example, with acupuncture, which I also practice, you know, any 3 or 4 acupuncturists you'll see the same client and have a different point prescription. The energy will respond to that and organize around the intent of the practitioner, and you'll have something wonderful happen in each case, unless it's a complete incompetent doing something. So in homeopathy, there definitely are different ways that you can approach a client. It's not always going to be. We have the holy grail of the simillimum that perfectly fits, and we always strive to give that. But when I take a client, I can sort of see various. If it's a family of remedies that will come into play, you'll probably need this one down the road, or sometimes say, I could give this one now, give that one later, or reverse the order. It will not make that big a difference. So other factors come into play, like what they expect or what their life situation will better respond to.
Well, this has been so fascinating, and we have run the clock out on the time we have for the UK Health Radio Network. We're going to continue this conversation, everybody. Anywhere that you find podcasts, just look up hashtag Wellbeing Podcast, and you'll find the New Life Perspectives radio show, and look up the episode with Jerry M. Kantor, and you'll hear some more about this. But in the meantime, would you please tell everybody where they can reach you and how to get the book?
If you simply Google Sane Asylums, Jerry Kantor, you'll come up. The Simon & Schuster site, that's the distributor, will come up. There's quite a few places you can get it. You can get it through Amazon, Simon & Schuster. Pretty much all the publishers have it. Sane Asylums, The Success of Homeopathy Before Psychiatry Lost Its Mind. Also, the homeopathic publishing sites have it, but it is available also in Kindle. So yeah, do pick it up. It's a history that you would not otherwise encounter.
Yeah, and I've heard that you're quite busy these days, but can people actually still work with you?
Yeah, it may take a few weeks. I work long hours, and I love meeting new clients. It doesn't get tiresome for me. Every time I work, I learn something, and that's enabled me to make some contributions to the materia medica, also certain insights that I've gained from having worked with people and delving unusual remedies. So that will appear in my forthcoming book. All experienced homeopaths will tell you that. And so our journals are full of stories of cases where someone has learned something new and expanded the understanding of a remedy. And it just doesn't get tired. It's just because it's having a front row seat on the great tragicomedy of humanity. we learn everything, and we've gained awareness of the consciousness of minerals, consciousness of animals, because we know what those remedies can address in human beings who inhabit the same states.
Amazing. All right, you guys, everybody in the UK Health Radio Network, till next week, be safe and be well, and look for us at hashtag Wellbeing Podcast, New Life Perspectives Radio. Thank you so much. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're here with our after chat with Jerry Kantor and the book, The Sane Asylum. And we wanted to have some fun in this after chat. You said you had a fun story.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is a fun story. A teenager was brought to me at one time, who was under the delusion that he was a robot.
Oh.
And this was causing quite a problem. He was impossible to teach. He was acting robotically. He was just failing school. His family was at a loss. He had defeated a number of therapists.
Defeated. I like that word.
Defeated. I'm a robot. I said, what does that mean? I'm just a mechanical object. I'm a robot. So what I did, I said, well, you know, it's not a problem for me. I've treated robots before, so this is fine. I'm not going to argue with you about this.
I like it.
So, but I found out, but going in just sort of casually going into the case, I said, so what's going on? How did this? Were you always a robot? What happened to you? And what's going on? And it turned out he was in a biology class and they were teaching Darwinism. And the lesson was that, you know, birds had no control over what color they would have, was completely a function of the environment. And they would adapt and become, you know, a certain kind of color. And in his case, well, everybody in the class heard this, but for something happened with him whereby he took this to this deep kind of a level, and that he decided he was a robot. Now, what I knew about his background, you know, when you take someone's case, you have to something like this. If you hyper focus on just that, oh, I've got to give you a drug that's an anti-robot drug. It's not going to work. But what I gained from his background was that there was a considerable amount of conditional love in his background. In other words, his parents were highly critical of him. He was a sensitive kind of person. He had poor self-esteem. He developed certain kinds of skin conditions. Now, warts are a dead giveaway for the remedy that I was suspecting. And it came to me, well, you know, this kid probably needs thuja. Thuja is a remedy made from arbor vitae, where the self-esteem is very poor. But I'll say more things about it. Someone who needs that remedy cannot access his or her self-interest. Like someone who doesn't need that remedy can just sort of ask their gut, is this person good for me? Is this a good thing to do? Yeah, I've got an idea about it. It's not a matter of intelligence. It's just being able to access your self-interest. Someone who can't do that is living a Groucho Marx joke that goes, you know, I would not join a club that would have me as a member. You know that joke?
Yeah.
Very much about self-deprecation. Yeah. I'm split. But if the club had such bad standards as to accept me, why would I go there? And even that kind of thinking is what I call mental gymnastics. You overthink things, go down a certain track, and you can't let go of this idea, and you cannot, as a result, I'm not a therapist, it's the subconscious has exchanged the ability to access your self-interest for mental gymnastics, overthinking. And yeah, you really are trying to disguise the fact of how bad you feel about yourself by your attraction to this over the mental agile thinking. So to me, his thinking he's a robot was an example of that.
Interesting. So did the thuja help him?
Yeah. So this is what happened. I said, yeah, I forget about it. I have no problem treating robots. You can be a robot. It doesn't matter to me. So I gave him thuja, and when he came back 5 weeks, he was no longer a robot. But he needed a remedy for depression. The thing about the thuja state, it's deeply about inauthenticity. You cannot lead an inauthentic life. It's not even the depression remedy, it's an anguish remedy. You cannot stand to be in your own skin. You will be anybody other than who you actually are. That's the Groucho Marx joke. The trauma to the personal self-worth is enormous. So anyway, that remedy state is a layer insulating you from the actual pain, the authentic pain of having been given conditional love as opposed to unconditional love in your family. That's a genuine pain. So when he came back, I was not surprised that he was depressed.
Yeah.
He was depressed, and he needed another, what I call psychotic, SYCOTIC remedy, where the identity, sense of identity has been disturbed, and you need a remedy that is actually related to the disease gonorrhea. It's complicated. That sounds complicated. That's what the psychotic remedies are. So natrum sulfurica is one of the remedies that follows after thuja. Not automatically, the other ones that could happen. But when he came back, he was depressed in the sense that the issue in that remedy, and you'll understand how this relates to thuja, is he felt like he didn't count for anything, like he was treated like like he was invisible. But that was a genuine feel, an authentic feeling, and he would talk about that kind of sadness, but he did not consider himself a robot anymore. So we had to peel that one layer away, let this other one come back, because the pain of that rejection was so intense that the thuja layer insulated him from that feeling, and we had to peel that away. So that's an instructive example of how homeopathy can work for a psychiatric condition.
So what about behaviors, addictive behaviors, something like gambling, for example? I don't know that that's necessarily considered a psychological issue, but essentially it is. So if you had somebody come in and who said, I have anxiety, and then you find out they're a gambler is the next level. And then what would you look at next? What would be below that? What would be the next thing that you would ask?
Yeah, there are miasmatic miasms that have definitely an overrepresentation for addictive behavior because of cyclical thinking. An addiction is whereby you want something and then you want something because you want something because you want something, and you can't break out of that loop.
Yeah.
I can put it in sexual terms too, because it relates to remedies like syphilis. If you need a syphilitic remedy, you're engaged in foreplay, but you never get what you want. You just go on it infinitely long, and you never get to a climax. And this is actually paralleled in the structure of the syphilitic spirochete, which has a cyclical structure. The syphilitic miasm is about secrecy and shame, and again, this cyclical thinking, which actually creates a groove that deepens the more you think about things. So syphilitic remedies are all, people who need those remedies tend to be addictive in every direction, for alcoholism, for gambling, for all kinds of stuff. So it's not necessarily just the type of gambling that you do. Certainly, if it's sexual addiction, you would think of syphilitum. But why would somebody gamble? That could go into another direction. But I would look pretty deeply at it to see what's the payoff for that person, what has worked for that person to when they went at their best and they were able to overcome it. Let me think what I was going to tell you about. Here's an addiction story I can tell you. Okay. This is really early in my career, but it was just very, very instructive. A good friend of mine told me that she had a cousin who was addicted to heroin. Can you do anything for that? She said. I said, I have absolutely no idea. This is really tough. So I'll give it a shot. So she sent me this cousin who by chance was basically a good guy. He didn't need any medications. He had a decent job, but I think he lost his job. He's on the verge of losing his family because of his heroin addiction. So I took his case like I normally did. And I said to him, again, this is like what I said to the robot guy. I said, you know what? I'm going to be the one person in your life who's not going to be in your case about your addiction. I don't approve of it. It's a bad thing. But for me to do my job, I'm going to sort of ignore that for the time being. And I just took his case. And it turned out, there were these various influences early in his life, various kinds of rejection. This goes back so far, I don't remember. But I gave him a remedy for what I thought was going on with him, and I sent him home. A few weeks later, then, he didn't contact me. He said, oh, gee, what's happened with so-and-so? So I contacted my friend. She said, oh, yeah, he's using again. It did nothing. So I said, well, tell him to come back. I want to understand this a little bit. Maybe I gave him the wrong remedy. Let me see if I can figure this out. So he came back and he told me, yes, he was using, but there was a slight change in the pattern. He went to a different place, or it took a little bit longer, or some things came up that in his awareness, but in the end, he did wind up using again and buying. So I said to him, okay, look, just stay with me for a couple of months. Let's see what happens. I don't care. Again, I'm not, I don't approve of you. I wish I could wave a magic wand, make you stop. This is terrible, but just stick with me. Let's see what happens. And I just did my usual thing. I treated him based on what would come up psychologically, what symptoms he had. And again, the second time it happened, also used, 2 or 3 more times, I think only just 2 more times, he came back and said, I stopped. I'm done. It cured him. And because I completely ignored, he just stopped doing it. And this is somebody who many times went to rehab and come out and constantly, fall back. And that was a matter of, again, like with the robot guy, I didn't pay attention to that overtly. I didn't get pulled into that trauma. I said, I'm just going to treat you till I see what's going on here. So that was enormously important to me to know that.
Yeah, addictions are so maddening, really, because you have a person who seems normal, generally, and then they keep creating a behavior, they keep doing something that is so self-destructive. And people in their lives want to shake them and say, just stop, just don't do that thing again. But there's an internal driver, there's something that drives them. And it sounds like you got to the thing that drove him. And
you have to do that. You have to, the Nancy Reagan idea, just say no, is inadequate.
Yeah.
For someone else, it's adequate, but not for somebody who's gone down that deep road. They do not know why it's happening. And I have encountered just unbelievably tragic stories of people destroying their families by their addictions. And there can be really nice people. The shame there and the guilt is something they seem to have to reenact over and over again. And you have to find some way to interfere with that at a deep level. Yeah. And I have to say, homeopathy is one of the ways, probably the deepest way in which you can interact with that. It's a bomb placed in the deep in the subconscious, and when it goes off, the architecture of the psyche changes. The dust settles, the smoke clears, and everything looks a little bit different.
Well, it's so frustrating. What there is for addiction, there are some drugs, but mostly there's programs where you go and admit to the addiction again and again, and deep in the groove and hang out with people who have the same problems. So we just, in this, our society, we don't have a lot of solutions for it, but I'm going to know homeopathy is one that's highly, highly successful in that area if you know what to do with it. So I'll tell you a fun story and you can tell me what you think of it. So we talked about Bach flowers, and there used to be a company that was just a dad and his son, and they would make blends for things that had emotional names. So there would be rejection and abandonment. It was one of them. Depression and gloom was another. Anxiety was another. But he had a whole list. And I don't remember how many there were. Maybe let's say there were 20, 25, 30 at the most. And when I was a kid, we used these quite often. Well, we had someone that was staying with my mom, and that person had children. And the person was very volatile. They would get up in the morning and they would just be screaming and yelling while the kids were trying to get ready for school. And it was terrible. It really disrupted the household. So my mom, she called it spiking. She put this Bach flower remedy, or the combination, in every liquid in the house, in the milk, in the juice, in the water, everything. And she said the next day, everybody was nice and calm, talking sweetly to one another. So this happened other times too. There was a friend of mine who, her family was just, they were nuts. Like, this family was crazy. And when they got together, they fought like hell. And so my friend, she lived just a few blocks away. And my mom, had all the homeopathy, everything, in the house. So she came over and she's like, there's a wedding, all the family's in town, and they're all fighting like crazy, and I can't stand it. What should I do? So she sends her home with Bach rescue remedy. And she says, just spike the iced tea. Probably unethical. They spiked the iced tea, and in 20 minutes, everybody was getting along nicely. And this whole event went off without a hitch. No fighting, no screaming. Nuclear, apocalypse would go off when this family got together, and it was just nice and calm. So what do you think about groups using a homeopathic. What do you think about this? Crazy stories.
Um, yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I mean, homeopathy is used at the public health level. It cured the epidemic leptospirosis in Cuba.
Really?
That's documented by the World Health Organization. So yeah, and it's always been fantastic if you think about people in epidemics as being a group. It's many examples of that. Cholera, fabulous results,
Really?
which has been suppressed again. And then right now there's an epidemic in Malawi, which I've written about, could be addressed with homeopathy. Yeah, no, it's spectacular results have been documented by anti-homeopaths, even like in London in the 1700s, in groups. When people do provings, homeopathic provings, the individuals in the proving find that the members of their family are influenced by it as well. So absolutely. And I one reason, I think homeopaths like to work with families because there's such overflow effect.
Yeah.
You really do well to treat everybody as opposed to just one member. And then if you treat just one member of the family, that person may outgrow the family and wind up, discombobulating the family history that way. I have an idea that I have never put into action. Actually, I'll just share it with you since we're
Okay.
just having fun. What I'd like to do sometimes, because I'm very interested in couples and relationships, and I've got people who would volunteer for this. I just don't have time to do it. Let's say I get a married couple, and I take their case, and I have a pretty good idea of what family remedies they're in, and I treat them. The idea would be to have each of them prove the other's remedy, so as to enter into their consciousness of the other person as a way of developing the marital relationship. I think that's completely valid. The inverse of the law of similars, I call it the law of inculcation, which happens when you do a proving. People temporarily inhabit this particular remedy state under the influence of a gross amount of substance. So when people, marital couples have a hard time seeing each other's point of view,
Yeah.
if they could temporarily inhabit it, that could be an opportunity for enormous growth. So sometime, if I ever have an opportunity to establish something like that, I would like to do that. I would also like to look at remedies made from predatory relationships. There are wasps which predate on particular kinds of insects, a spider or a bee. What would happen if people proved together the remedies of those predatory relationships? That would be something I would love to
That would be
investigate. There's all kinds of
fascinating
interesting things
too.
that could be done.
I like the way you think. That's my mind. It's always trying to think, well, what if I did? And what if we did? In our work, it's very interesting. There are some similars to homeopathy similarities, and there's some that, that are absolutely not. But what we often see again and again, when we first experienced it, we thought, holy crap. I mean, this is Einstein's spooky action at a distance. We would treat one person, and a lot of times it would be about the relationship. So we work at the neurological level and the sensation caused by the discomfort in the relationship. So physical sensation. So let's say, it's in their gut. They just really feel it, and the tension in the head, and we work on the neurological level. So the person would completely collapse the pattern. They'd get to full neutral on it. So they're in a state of, all right, whatever, I guess. Okay, it's fine, They go home, and miraculously, the other person seems changed too. The relationship is completely changed. But where it got really weird is when it started happening thousands of miles away. So I had a woman come in, she's a doctor of physical therapy, and she was there for her husband, but we touched on, everything's related. So we touched on her mom as well. When she got home, it was a 20-minute drive home. When she got home, the phone rang, it was still a landline, and it was her mother from 3,000 miles away that said, hey, I just realized that maybe over your whole lifetime, my actions probably had a bad effect on you. So I just want to say I'm sorry. And the person stood there with her mouth open because she never in her whole lifetime ever would have expected this phone call. She didn't even know what to do with it. But now we see it happening again and again and again. So it's part of that interaction of energy between people, even at a crazy, crazy distance. So it would be fascinating to know if a similar thing happens with homeopathy, One of the ways I look at it, the way I describe it is that, you know, one drop of vinegar in milk sours the milk. You have a culture, right? In your family. We have a soup, an energetic soup. We're all in it, and it has a taste and a smell and a flavor and all of that. When one of us changes, the culture starts to change as well. And when they're changed profoundly, the culture can be changed profoundly. So be interesting to try that on with homeopathy as well.
Oh, it happens only all the time.
Only all the time. Only all
I'll
the
give you an
time.
example. So, I mean, and once again, when you understand that, you sort of see, you know, how we are has a tremendous impact on others. The remedy Ignatia, are you familiar with that one?
Oh, absolutely. We use it.
Okay, so that's
for grief
a
many
grief remedy.
times, Yeah.
Let me explain it to you. Maybe you already know this part about Ignatia. People who need that remedy are invested in principle, the idea that principle rules the world. So if that kind of person who is a little bit idealistic suffers a really shocking loss, it's not just a loss, but a shocking one that undermines, really turns things topsy-turvy, she will not simply shed the idea of principle, but it will become inverted. So if she thinks that everything works out for the best, the inversion would be, well, there's a principle there, but now it's the opposite. Everything will work out for the worst.
Oh,
So she manufactures unwittingly victimization scenarios left and right. You'll have a conversation with her and you'll say something perfectly normal. She'll take it slightly wrong and she'll ask you more about it. And you say, well, I explained that to you. Well, what are you getting mad at me for? Well, I'm not mad at you. Oh, now you're yelling at me.
Oh,
So suddenly, you know, you will see that this is happening. She's reenacting. The psyche wants to reenact its trauma. So if she's had this very traumatic loss or upheaval, the psyche was now committed to reenacting it as a way of understanding it. So when you give Ignatia the tiny version of that, that stops happening. So the person will come back and say, Jerry, you know, your remedy did nothing, but people are being nice to me now. Oh yeah, and by the way, somehow that whatever happened is not bothering me so much.
Great.
So there's lots of things like that. I'll tell you another story, which is just fun.
Okay, go for it.
I've told it many times, but it's just a lot of fun about, unless you want to ask me something.
No, tell me your story and I'll ask you something next.
Again, way back early in my career, I just get such a kick out of this. Client came to me and said, well, can you do anything for me? This is really terrible. I said, what's the matter? All I do is work. I work 50 hours a week. I don't want to do anything but work. It's just horrible. I'm irritable. I'm snappy. I don't want to do anything. I said, well, what's going on in your family? I don't care about them at all. I've got a sister who lives in Israel. I don't even want to see her. I just want to work all the time. Really? Yeah. So anyway, and I'm impatient. I gave her a very easy remedy. I gave Nux vomica. So 2 weeks go by, and then there's a message on my answering machine. She's canceled. She's not coming in. I called her back. Hi, I'm so and so. What's going on? If I give you the wrong remedy, I'll make a change. What's going on with you? She says, your remedy did nothing. I said, well, what's going on with you? Anything different? Then there's a big sigh on the end of the phone. She said, well, I mean, I'm going up. If you want to know what's happening, yeah, I'm taking a vacation with my husband. We're going to go to Israel, see my sister.
Nothing changed.
It's 3 months. Yeah, I mean, I had the time. I figured I would take it. So we're going to go see her. But but that's not the end of the story. I would go to work, and my office was in this building, which I was in the second floor, and downstairs was a large room where they were teaching yoga. And I went to work, and I peek in the yoga room. There she is doing yoga. I never got credit for the remedy. It's one of these situations where it's just person is completely oblivious. Every single thing I prescribed for completely changed, and she didn't even recognize it. Yeah. But that's just fantastic. That's how we should get better. We should own the improvement. We should own the change. I just found that absolutely hysterical.
Weirdly, that was exactly the question I was going to ask you. So we see it all the time. People get amnesia that they ever had the problem in the first place. I was working with a client at a big event, a seminar, and the person needed a little bit of help. So I got in and helped her, and she kept saying, my mother hates me. She's the devil. She wants to kill me. She's the worst person ever. And I don't know this person. So I'm thinking this must be a terrible human. After about 3 minutes, 5 minutes, she says, oh, actually, you know what? My mom really, really loves me. And you know what? I'm her favorite. Really. Yeah, she's a person who's really fabulous. Like she has a big, big personality. And yeah, she has her issues, but you know what? She actually really loves me. That's great. I said, when we started, you told me your mom was the devil. She wanted to kill you. She looked at me like I was insane. After 5 minutes, I kind of smiled. I waited for it, raised my eyebrows, and then she said, I did say that, didn't I? I mean,
Wow.
so
Wow.
what we found is that when it's completely gone, and we use the term the nervous system, and by the way, we switch it out with the subconscious and even the ego. When it's completely gone, there's no driver. The brain is not interested in it even at all, immediately a lot of times. So it's terrible for business. We've had people that have forgotten that they came to see us. Like, oh, wow, that was really complete. But it's true. Once there's no driver, the brain has no interest. It just doesn't think about it again.
But isn't this why women can have more than one child?
Yeah, right?
You forget the
Exactly.
pain of the first one, and yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Do you do homeopathy for childbirth?
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't personally. I just do like a lot of acupuncture during
Oh, yeah.
for childbirth. But yeah, there are kits for doulas. That's maybe 6 remedies that a doula would carry. Um, that make childbirth vastly improve the circumstance of that.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely.
I have one last final question because we've run out of time again. It's so much fun talking to you. In the past, I saw in your book a lawsuit against Highlands Remedies. There's the two major ones were Highlands and Boiron here in the States. Those are the ones we can use for the most part. And I noticed that there was a time in which we used to have children's remedies, teething tabs. And I used them for my kids and they were amazing. And then all of a sudden that was gone. That you could no longer find homeopathy for children, put together for the kind of the common things that kids would get. What do you know about that?
Yeah, it was a vague memory of that. It was one aspect of the anti-homeopathy campaign, because there was belladonna in one remedy used
Yeah.
in that. Yeah, they demonized the remedy. It's made absolutely no sense at all, except it's the capitalist agenda of the pharmaceutical companies. They want to create an association. They don't even have to wipe homeopathy out. They just want to create a negative
Right.
the confusion around it, or a negative association for it. Back to the homeopathic hospitals, the one place you'll still see the word homeopathy will be on the gates of these decrepit, terrifying looking old broken down asylums. That's where they're still happy to have it, and create an association between homeopathy with the old terrors of the latter part of the century. It's just so cynical, so disgraceful. Yeah, no, it works. It works. People think homeopathy is dangerous. Oh, you give me arsenic. You're going to give me arsenic.
Yeah.
Oh, belladonna. Oh my God.
Yeah.
The foolishness is encouraged, and they put the same remedies on the same shelves with non-homeopathics just to create confusion. It's very effective. It's terrible. People just do not have any awareness of this, and as I say, it's too bad because it isn't complicated, but it is exactly opposite everything we're being fed.
Exactly.
So that's a problem, real problem.
Yeah, exactly opposite. Well, the truth is that it's one of those things that has been hidden and it's been deeply hidden. And I would recommend, if you're not like me and been raised with it, dig in, start to look into it, find out what homeopathy is. See, a homeopath. It's a rabbit hole you could go down if you're a conspiracy theorist that you would absolutely dig what the history of this thing is. And I think this book actually is one of those places to start about the conspiracy of how it was pushed underground and why. And also, if you're a person that we service UK Health Radio and people who are interested in health and healing themselves, it's one of those things that you can learn to do a little bit for yourself as well. There's things that can save a life if you know how to do it. It's really, really worth learning about, in my opinion.
Very well put.
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, I hope that you'll consider coming back and chatting with us again.
I would love that. Yeah, maybe at the end of the year when my book on existential homeopathy comes out.
Ah, that would be right up our alley. I'd love to chat about that. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. I really have appreciated this conversation. So for now, we'll say goodbye. Goodbye to everybody around the world. If you're here from UK Health Radio Land, we'll see you again next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for being here with us on the New Life Perspective radio show. For more information or to find out more about the work that Bill and I do, please visit us at cognomovement.com or email us at info@cognomovement.com. See you again soon.